Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight our guest is United States Senate candidate John Sharp. And John, of course, has an extensive resume that we're going to be talking about. We welcome you to the program.
Thank you, Gary. Good to be with you.
Part of that resume was former railroad commissioner in the state of Texas, state comptroller, which explains why you know so much about public finance, right?
Right.
So what have you been doing lately, Mr. Sharp? The last time we saw you on the ballot was with in 2002 was with Tony Sanchez.
Yeah, since then, I've been a partner in a company called Ryan Incorporated, which is an accounting firm based in Dallas. I've been in the Austin office. I'm no longer a partner. I'm still affiliated with the firm and do some work with them, but been doing that for about the last 8 years or so.
So where do you live?
I live in Austin, Texas.
Just can't get out of that place, huh?
Yeah, no, but I always want to get back to Victoria. I've always thought that the sequence of an average Texas small town kid was to, leave your hometown and go somewhere, try to make some money, and then spend your rest of your life trying to figure out how to get back to your small town. And I haven't succeeded in that yet.
Victoria's no longer a small town.
Well, I'm talking about Placido, which is the real town I'm from, which is 200 people.
I see. So anyway, now you want to now you truly are a candidate for the United States Senate. Why is that?
It is the most. It's where everything's messed up. It is the most important problem that we have in the country, in my opinion, is the Congress of the United States. And if the Congress of the United States continues on the course that they're on, you're not going to have a dollar bill that's worth anything, and you've got to figure out a way to shave the cost of doing business in Washington, just like we did when I was controller in the state of Texas. They're out of control.
Well, do you think, John, that you get elected to the U.S. Senate, your Democratic colleagues are going to listen to a moderate conservative, fiscal conservative from Texas who wants to tell them how they should do things?
I actually think that's a really good point. I mean, one of the things that's going on right now is that because Washington is so partisan, which probably none of us are actually for, but they are the most partisan place on the planet. And when the Republicans are in charge, Democrats don't have anything to do, and when Democrats are in charge, Republicans don't have anything to do. So when the head of NASA is interested in a meeting that's going on today in the United States Senate about NASA's future, there are no Texans in that room. Kay Hutchison and John Cornyn are not invited to that meeting. When there's something that concerns funding in the medical center in Houston, or something on highway funding, or University of Texas, or whatever, our two senators are not invited to that. John Tower, Lloyd Benson, Lyndon Johnson, all three said at one time in their careers, it is important that we have one of each in the United States Senate, a Democrat and Republican. They all three said that, so that no matter who is in charge, we got somebody in the room representing Texas interests, and right now, and for the foreseeable future, we don't.
Now, you mentioned, you talked about the threat to the dollar, and I guess that refers to the 10-year estimate by the administration and now the Congressional Budget Office of a $9 trillion increase in the debt, which, just for our viewers, that's more debt than the United States has accumulated in our entire history up till the election of Barack Obama. Yeah. This is an astounding number.
It has been an astounding number for a long time. I mean, the last administration doubled the debt. The last conservative administration doubled the national debt. We're continuing to do that now. I'm convinced of this. After 20 years or so of operating in this realm, the primary difference between Republicans and Democrats when it comes to spending your money is both will spend every dime in the Treasury. Republicans say they feel bad about it, and that is the only difference I have ever found in 20 years. I mean, they're out of control, and you have to rein that in. You have to prioritize, and you have to rein that in. Ben Bernanke knows, Barack Obama knows, everybody in Congress knows that if you don't move that money out of stimulus, if you don't get the TARP money back, if you don't put that back into the balance sheet, sometime soon, when you feel everything is beginning to stabilize, you're going to deteriorate the dollar and simply wake up one morning and no one is going to go buy your debt anymore.
Well, some Democrats in Washington think the answer to reducing the debt is a massive tax increase. Of course, they say only for the rich, but we know that won't raise enough money. Is that the answer, is to raise taxes to fund runaway government spending?
No, I tell you what I think you're going to have to do, because I don't think there's the courage in Washington, D.C. to deal with the debt problem. One side wants to raise taxes in order to deal with the debt problem. The other side wants to simply borrow more money to raise the debt problem, and somehow that is all magical.
Which one of those is a more responsible course of actions, however?
Well, let me tell you what the responsible course of action is.
Third.
The responsible course of action, the only time I have ever seen Washington, D.C. deal with reducing budgets that everyone knew should be dealt with had to do with the Base Closing Commission. A decade or so ago, if you recall, everybody knew that you had bases out there, military bases that needed to be closed. Nobody wanted to vote for it because they didn't want to go back home and say, hey, my base got closed. So Congress recognized, we don't have the guts to do this. And so they created the Base Closing Commission. The Base Closing Commission made a recommendation, and in the legislation for the Base Closing Commission, it said there will be an up and down vote, yes or no. You don't get to have amendments to exclude your deal or whatever, yes or no. And you either vote for it or you vote against it. And that passed, and that's the only way they ever got to do it. I believe that Congress is no braver today than they were when that Base Closing Commission was going on, both parties, and they've both proven it. And so I think you're going to have to do something like that for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the current deficit, and have a set of recommendations and say, okay, you get to vote. And John, you're going to vote yes one way, you're going to break the country, you vote another way, and you continue business as usual.
People have said that and recommended that, and they've also said that everything will be on the table. Now, surely a guy with your background in state government who has balanced budgets and brought in revenue to do so from time to time, I'm sure, maybe not because you were the architect, but maybe you voted on it in the state Senate. Surely you're going to agree with us that revenue also needs to be a part of that grand bargain that you're talking about.
And it may well be, and we've seen that in Texas a time or two. But that should never be the first resource that you go to. The first resource that you go to is, how do you make this stuff efficient? I mean, when I was controller and we did away with food stamps, we didn't go in and just slash and burn food stamp program. We put in an electronic card that's now been adopted in all 50 states. We saved, billions of dollars in fraud. We no longer have to pay for printing them. We don't have to pay for them being hauled around and all this kind of stuff. And there's tons of things like that. After we did that in Texas, the Texas Performance Review, if you recall, was then adopted by Al Gore. He called it the National Performance Review. He asked us to go to Washington, D.C. We put a team together in Texas, shipped him off to Washington, D.C., produced the National Performance Review for him, and it had several $billion and lots of money in cuts and things and recommendations, and none of it passed. And the reason none of it passed, or some of it did, but the reason most of it didn't pass is because everybody in Congress is a subcommittee chairman of something, and they spend their whole life protecting that subcommittee and all the agencies affiliated with it. I'm telling you, I don't believe that they have the guts to handle this problem any more than they could at base closing, and you're going to have to do it in a different way that circumvents Congress in order to get this budget reasonably balanced again.
Including entitlement reform, I would guess.
Especially entitlement reform, because
Speaking of entitlements, why don't you tell us what how you see the Medicare reform issue that is front and center, which the Democrats may pass in terms of its balancing of the budget implications.
You're talking about the
current projected
health care.
Yes, health care.
Well, let me talk first about, and I'll come back to that, but let me talk about entitlement reform. I mean, if we don't do something on Social Security soon, it's going to be totally out of control. I mean, with the recession, there were some people saying, by 2018, Social Security will be, horses out the barn door. Now that's fallen back to 2015 and maybe 2014 because of the revenues shortfall that's coming in because of the recession that's going on. So we don't have a lot of time to deal with Social Security. And people know what the problem is with Social Security. They know that retirement ages are going to have to be adjusted and stuff like that. Nobody wants to vote to do it. So you're going to have when you have a situation where everybody knows what has to be done, you're going to have a situation like the Base Closing Commission and to give Congress the courage to do what's necessary.
By the way, Gary, he said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you said you had this relationship with Gore. You were the Gore for President Chairman in 1988. I'm sure you regret that he didn't beat George Bush in 2000, don't you?
In 1988?
Yeah, you were a leader for Gore for president.
No, I wasn't.
You were not.
You know who was? Rick Perry.
Well, that's true. I have y'all confused. I apologize.
Yeah.
I wonder if Vice President Gore is supporting Perry for re-election as governor.
I think not.
I don't know.
Speaking of Rick Perry.
Yeah, I know. I don't know who was. I remember he was on that team, but
I think he was the state chairman.
I actually wasn't for him.
And you mentioned Governor Perry, and you were the leader of the Texas Tax Reform Commission, which in essence created the gross receipts tax, which some critics, including me, have said is really not a good tax because you're taxing business on revenue and not income, and you could have a situation where a company makes no profit but still has to pay the tax.
Right. It's like a sales tax. You have a sales tax taxes you when you have revenues and no profits. Virtually, a property tax taxes you when you have revenues but no profits. And you're exactly right. The one tax we cannot have is an income tax. This therein is the problem. There is a constitutional ban. What you just said is, hey, I want an income tax, not this one on my business. Well, you got a little ban in the Constitution that prohibits an income tax, and that's why you don't have one and why you can't do it. What happened in that situation
So what you're saying is that if that wasn't there, your commission may have come back and recommended a small percent business income tax.
No, you couldn't, because there is a ban in the Constitution prohibiting that from happening.
Nobody wants an income tax.
In the first place, and there is still a ban in the Constitution.
You can overcome it with a two-thirds vote.
The alternative, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, they didn't even have a majority vote for anything in the legislature. The alternative was sales tax. In other words, for your business, a sales tax on every service that there was. Sales tax, 6.25% tax on lawyers, 6.25% tax on everybody else, and that's why trial lawyers and other groups actually endorsed this as opposed to something else, because they knew what the alternatives were.
Because a consumption tax at around that percentage would generate enough revenue for the state, would it not? And we could
it would have generated. It would have been a much bigger tax than this.
And it would have. And you could then really take a meat axe to runaway property taxes, especially for homeowners in the state, which is still a problem.
Well,
probably for you in Austin, just like it is in
Houston.
Houston.
The problem that they were facing at that particular time, as you remember, Tom Craddock had a plan rejected by the House of Representatives. David Dewhurst had a plan rejected by the Senate, in fact, rejected by the Senate Finance Committee. Couldn't even get it out of the own Senate Finance Committee. Rick Perry had a plan rejected by, best I can tell, everybody. They had a Supreme Court that said, we're fixing to shut down your schools, folks. And so the governor asked me, and other folks came to me and said, our schools are fixing to shut down. They're not going to open in September. Can you cross over here and see if you can put this together? And we, frankly, didn't know that we could come up with something, because you couldn't do an income tax like you suggested. You had to come up with something different. And frankly, we schools didn't close, and that's the bellwether that it worked.
Is that about all that was accomplished? Because certainly you'd have to say that wasn't about improving the quality of our schools
or reducing property tax.
Because we've got still the dropout rate, and we've got a story in the paper about our SAT numbers are still horrible.
No, that wasn't what our Tax Reform Commission was talking about. What we were called in to do is find a way to keep the schools open. It has to do with taxes. And some of the things that were recommended, for instance, one of the things that happened in there is you had property tax rates went down from $1.50 in most areas of the state to $1. The problem is that the legislature didn't follow it up with the second part of everything, and that is do something about appraisals. And so they never did anything about appraisals. So even though the property tax rate was $1.50 in most school districts in the state of Texas, it is now about $1, or if it's higher than $1, it was voted on by the people in the district. The appraisal creep went through the roof, and the legislature didn't put any controls on it, and that's what.
So at the end of the day, homeowners
so
really
after
didn't
2 or
save
3
much.
years, it goes back to the same where it was before.
So we still have a property tax problem in Texas, David.
You do.
And should we be embarrassed that that's all we were trying to do there is just keep schools from closing? I mean, are you embarrassed to be a Texan given what we do in public education?
I'm never embarrassed to be a Texan. I would.
Are you ashamed of our conduct and the way we put these kids in the position where they can't get even a high school degree?
If I had my druthers, I would make some changes in public school education. I am not running for governor. I'm running for the United States Senate.
We're going to ask about that.
And I've certainly proposed some of those changes in the past. I think we ought to pay more attention to middle-class families when it comes to property taxes, when it comes to appraisals, and when it comes to tuition. I mean, one of the things that I regret most about what the legislature did is they started ignoring middle-class families and drove tuition rates through the roof in Texas. Fortunately, some families had the Tomorrow Fund, which I started back, several years ago, and 150,000 families bought into that, and so they were insulated from that as those tuitions were rising. But the part that really discourages me about government, state government and the federal government, is that they have forgotten what Sam Rayburn and folks like that talked about years ago, and that is just pay attention to working families, working families, working families. People are ignoring the middle class. They're ignoring them on tuition, they're ignoring them on property taxes, ignoring them on education, and all kinds of things. You've got one party paying a whole bunch of attention to poor folks, which is great, but not to the exclusion of the middle class. You got the other party paying a whole bunch of attention to rich folks, which is fine, but to exclusion. And nobody's paying any attention to the middle class. Perfect example is tuition. Oh, don't worry about tuition rates going up. We got all kinds of scholarships here. Well,
Right.
Who gets to pay the scholarships? The middle class families get to pay the scholarships. They earn too much money to ever have a scholarship for their kid, but they don't earn enough to not worry about how to pay for college education. And that is replete all through, and it is why this economy crashed. It crashed because the middle class ran out of gas, ran out of money to spend, ran out of money in their pockets, couldn't afford their mortgages and things like that. And the government has been treating them like an ATM machine, and it's finally come home to roost.
And that's why I guess the Texas Tomorrow Fund is now in financial troubles, because of the increased tuition rates means that the amount that has to be reimbursed.
In fact, the
is part of it.
comptroller,
That's
Gary's party's comptroller says that your idea is now bankrupt.
That's part of the reason that it's messed up, is because they did it. The other part of the reason is because that comptroller killed the program. And let me tell you something.
Susan Combs.
If you
How
went
did she
in,
kill it?
She killed the program by simply not allowing any new people into the program. She had a study done by a bunch of folks that were have been mad for years that Tomorrow Fund existed, because they were selling annuities to folks, and the Tomorrow Fund was competing with them. Nobody was buying their annuities, and so they finally got what they wanted. But if you go to the Social Security program right now and you say, we're not taking any more people in the Social Security, how long do you think it's going to be before you bankrupt Social Security?
Maybe about a year.
About a year. The same thing with teacher retirement system, same with employee retirement system, firefighter retirement system. If you kill the new folks coming in, what happens? That's what the last two controllers did. They even made statements, there's too many rich people on this program. You know who the rich people were in the Tomorrow Fund? Grandma and Grandpa, buying contracts for those little kids. Yeah, they have some money, but they were buying it for a first grader somewhere to make sure that they could go to college sometime in the future. It's a travesty that they killed those programs.
Given that record, I guess you're taking that'll be the end of the Texas Tomorrow Fund.
They're taking what?
They're going to take it away. It'll be gone because they've cut off the new blood.
But no, it won't be gone because it's constitutionally protected, and everybody that has a Tomorrow Fund contract.
But
The
no
current
new
people under current contracts are going to be
ultimately have to be funded by state revenue.
or the universities would absorb the cost out of their tuition.
Same thing.
I mean, it's one way or another. I mean, they raise the tuition, taking one hand and giving another. I mean, that's what raising tuition has done.
Let's talk about the politics, because you decided you're going to run for the Senate, not governor, which is interesting. Before we came on there, we talked, and you seem to be confident that the Democrats have a real good chance this year of winning the Texas governorship. So you have extensive experience in state government as well as the private sector. So why don't you want to be governor of Texas?
Because, as I mentioned before, that's not where the problems are.
Okay.
I mean, you can mess up a lot of things in Texas, and Texans will overcome it. But it has gotten to the point in Washington D.C. where I think you gotta start fixing things, and and that's where the problems are, fiscally and otherwise. And the other situation is that Texas needs somebody in the room when things having to do with Texas are brought up, and that simply doesn't exist right now.
Democrats are going to be controlling the Senate for the foreseeable future because of their numbers.
I think it's probably a safe bet for the foreseeable future that's the case. You've got twice as many Republicans up for election in the Senate, I think, than you have Democrats. And I think most people agree that that's going to be the case for quite a while.
All right, so you are headed to a jungle primary. Everybody on the ballot. We could have, like some of these earlier U.S. Senate races, you could have 18 people running for the U.S. Senate.
Mm-hmm. Had 20-something last time.
20. A lot of Republicans talking about it. We have you and Bill White. How do you handicap the politics? Who gets... What type of candidates are going to get in the runoff? Which two? I mean, not names, but the type.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you.
Could two Democrats get in the runoff?
Here's how possible. Here's how I handicap it. In 1998, when I ran against Rick Perry, I lost by 1 percentage point against Rick Perry. The other Democrat in the race, who was Gary Morrow, running against George Bush, lost by 20 or 30 percentage points. I forget what that was. The difference, the reason that I made up the 20 or 30 points or whatever, and no other Democrat did, is because I got 90-something% of the independent vote in the Texas in that election. Same thing happened in 2002. All the other Tony Sanchez and a whole bunch of them were 20 or 30 points behind. I was a handful, 2 or 3 points behind, whatever that was. All the other Democrats were behind me. It is the independent. This special election is not a primary. It's not a Democratic primary, not a Republican primary. It's Democrats, Republicans, and independents that all come to the polls. And if there is a Democrat that can get 60, 70, 80, 90% of the independent vote, is going to win that election and be a United States Senator from Texas.
Okay, and it's also a matter of turning out some people who are excited to be either for a Republican or for a Democrat. And we've had two probable opponents of yours, White and Dewhurst, on, and I asked them questions in these areas, these hot-button areas, so you get to be the next guy. And that would be, the president says he's going to leave don't ask, don't tell up to the Congress. Bill White says, I'm going to leave it to the generals. Where are you on don't ask, don't tell? Would you legislate it away?
Well, I think you should certainly ask the generals what their opinion is of it and whether or not the thing is working. And I haven't asked the general that. I've visited with him certain times. But I think that this mess we have in Washington right now is a whole lot more important than the wedge issues that may come up in a campaign, whether it's that one or whether it's guns and everything else that comes up. This cannot be an election that's held that's based on things.
Well, here's a wedge that I understand you're running with in where you speak about Bill White, who joined Mayor Bloomberg of New York's Committee Against Illegal Guns. And in fact, when we talked about guns, and I didn't know that you were saying anything about his participation there, Bill White says, well, David, I'm a Second Amendment guy. And he refused to even discuss banning the importation of Chinese assault weapons. Yeah. Do you have him cowed or what?
Well, I don't know. But here's the problem. Back to what I just mentioned about this election should not be about those issues.
I know, but that's a wedge issue that you are apparently running with.
Let me explain. I comment on it. Let me tell you something. If a Democrat has to defend himself against those kinds of issues, particularly on guns, you got no chance of getting to the real issues, which are economic issues and things like that. And since you brought it up, I mean, I bring it up when it is asked of me, and that is when you go to Mayor Bloomberg of New York and you become a co-founder of an organization called Mayors Against Guns or Mayors Against Gun Violence, I'm not sure what it is, and that organization is viewed by the National Rifle Association as the most radical anti-gun organization in the state. You can say all the right things and all this kind of stuff, but if you have to defend that while you've got $1 million or $2 worth of ads hitting you all over East Texas, I'm telling you, I've been around this state enough to know that's a non-starter. You didn't go anywhere. You'll never get to the issues that matter. And when people have asked me about that, I said, you bet, that's right. If you are the co-founder of an organization that the NRA believes is one of the most radical gun control organizations in the state, to his credit, he quit last Thursday or the Thursday before last.
White pulled out of that organization.
Or something like that, 2 weeks ago,
what you're saying?
something like that. Yeah. After being in it for 3 years. That's a problem. And I know that the Republicans are looking at that saying, I hope that's the guy they nominate because we're going to kill him on one issue.
And there's also you mentioned millions of dollars. Before we close in the next 30 seconds, can you compete with a guy like Bill White and Dewhurst, both of them pretty wealthy on their own?
I'm going to have $5 million. I've got $3 million in the bank right now. I'm going to have $5 million to spend before it's over with, and I think $5 million is enough money to get into the runoff.
I think that $5 million will satisfy me. You know,
That's chump change for you, Jones.
Thank you for coming here all the way from Dallas or Austin, Texas, wherever it was.
Austin, David.
Good luck to you.
Good to be with you guys.
Thanks for being here.
Good to be here again.
And you can view tonight's show, along with a follow-up discussion plus more, by looking at Red, White, and Blue at HoustonPBS.org, so check that out. And until next time, get informed and get active.